condom use, for a lot of men, it's said to imply a lack of trust. And so it's dispensed with once a relationship becomes regular, longitudinal. And the men who maybe shouldn't be trusted are the ones who are sometimes the most insistent and end up being dangerous to the people they say they love. Why is this still a problem in 2011?
I guess I'll go. There are a lot of problems with the idea of condom use, especially if you have been in a long-term and maybe what you think is a monogamous relationship. One, I mean, if the woman brings up the idea of condom use, you know, it puts her on the spot as, well, maybe you have a reason for using a condom. Maybe the woman is not educated on how to use a condom or the idea of a condom. She's afraid to approach her husband, her partner, you know, whatever relationship they may have. Maybe she doesn't feel comfortable enough. And so the idea of the woman empowering herself with that information is still something that we need to continue to do. The issue of immigration status contributes a lot to that. The stigma associated, well, the stigma associated with the very idea of a condom is still very prevalent in people's minds. And so again, it goes back to the issue of education and people feeling comfortable around using condoms. I think that's still something that most women don't feel comfortable with.
And something I'd like to add is that it's important to understand that if someone tests positive within the context of a relationship, it's not necessarily because they were cheating. They could have been completely faithful but contracted HIV prior to starting that relationship. So I don't want to engage sort of a blame game of, oh, well, you're positive, so therefore, you've been cheating on me. The other thing is that there's no such thing as immaculate transmission. So when we're talking about Latinas getting HIV, well, from whom are they getting HIV? They're getting it from men. And what we need to do is involve men as equal partners in this, because they're the ones who are anatomically qualified to wear the condoms. Even with the female condom, male cooperation is still required. And until we have vaccines and microbicides and things like PrEP, which are methods that women can really control, we're going to have to rely on the cooperation and involvement of men.
Not necessarily cheating, but honesty about what you've been doing previous to this evening in this room would seem to be in order, and that's where some of the problem comes in.
I could have been, let's say, the only partner I've ever had was my first husband. So I've never cheated on anyone, but I contracted HIV from my husband. So my personal history, very wholesome, okay? But unless and until I've been tested for HIV, I can't say that I'm low risk. I can't say that I'm not putting someone at risk unless I know myself whether or not I have HIV. And we have to remember that because HIV is transmitted in the context of committed relationships, it's not necessarily because people are cheating, it's because people have HIV and don't know they have HIV, and those are the folks who are most likely to transmit it.
So talking about your history is not necessarily any protection.
No, it isn't. And I think that to some extent where we have to go in terms of normalizing this is that anyone who is sexually active is potentially at risk of having HIV. And I think that if you take away some of those judgments that Mary Beth talked about and really sort of ensure that you yourself take the first steps and taking care of yourself by getting an HIV test and knowing what your status is, I think it becomes easier then to try and negotiate that with the partners that you're with. It's really important to really talk about that as much as possible. I say very often that the biggest thing that you can learn is when people come out about their status. I've been living with HIV for 24 years, and I think it's really important that you try and get the courage, and I know it's difficult, but really come out about your status. Because I think you can really work to engage and inform and educate other people about that, and they'll ask questions, but then they'll also probably have to rethink, wow, I didn't know that they were positive, because I had a certain stereotype of what I thought that person may or may not look like, who they may or may not be, and so consequently maybe I need to reassess what I'm doing in my own life, and maybe I need an HIV test and need to get more aware.